Hello and welcome to Pharma Television News Review here in Munich at BioEurope 2010. On this show, I have Nigel Gaymond, who is Chief Executive of the BioIndustry Association based in the UK. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Nigel, the BioIndustry Association, or the BIA, is obviously an important industry association for biotechnology companies in the UK. What would you say is the primary role or goal even of BIA?
Well, I think it changes. I mean, it's been in existence for about 21 years now. I am effectively the fifth CEO. I actually interfaced with it back in 1989 when it was formed, when I was working in Boston. I think its role has changed. It has been very good on the lobbying side. I'm sort of focusing a bit more on the ecosystem, if you like, in terms of what the UK is and should be. So it's a dual purpose.
Right. So when you talk about the ecosystem, you're talking about presumably largely the financial conditions which enable biotechnology to thrive.
The financial conditions, but also the science base. So we were particularly pleased at the recent comprehensive spending review with the government coming out and actually ring-fencing science budgets, which was tremendously important. But that's one side of the equation. So we'll certainly be lobbying hard for the upcoming growth point paper, which we hope is going to take care of the other side of the ledger, which is very much the small companies, the innovation, where the science is going to get exploited and translated.
Right. When you talked about back in 1989, the UK, well, UK was one of the leading biotechnology centres in Europe, countries in Europe.
Yep.
Would we be able to claim that today?
Oh, I think we're still certainly one of the leaders, and if not the lead. Depends on the statistics you look at, but certainly we do not hold the lead we perhaps once had. Other countries have mobilised very successfully, and there's been some notable successes in, say, Switzerland and Belgium, who have done a great job. One of the reasons I was recruited back and felt comfortable coming back from San Diego, which is not a shabby place to live, was very much what I felt the UK could and should be when you look at the asset base we've got with our universities, with 4 of the top 10 universities, 19 of the top 100. I don't think there's a super cluster of activity anywhere in the world that wouldn't love to have that as a starting base.
Right. So when you joined BIA and you took on that commitment, you did a diagnostic, if we could use that term, on the industry here in the UK. And so how would you measure the state of biotechnology, and what vision and what corrections do you want to see happen?
I think some of them are cultural. I spent 25 years in the States, and one of the things it does imbue you with is a can-do spirit. I think we've always had fantastic science. We've always come up with ideas. We've always had London as an asset, and it's a huge asset, and perhaps we've underutilized it. Maybe we don't talk about ourselves enough. Maybe we're a little bit too quiet about things. We had some visitors through BIA about a month ago from Ohio. They hadn't been through for 5 years. I outlined where we were in the industry, and the comment at the end of it was, looking at each other, the Americans, was, why haven't we been to the UK in the last 5 years? Why are we going to Finland? Why are we going to Israel? And it just really reinforced to me that perhaps we weren't being aggressive about saying why people should do life sciences here in the UK. And when you look at that science base, that question really needs to be asked hard. We should be much, much better than we are.
So it's largely a question of voice. What voice comes from the UK about? In other words, we're not, as you just said, blowing our trumpet loud enough.
Not blowing our trumpet, perhaps. You know, we are perceived sometimes as a bit risk averse and so on. I will say in the past, I certainly would have viewed the UK market in terms of its level of executives as being perhaps weaker, certainly in the States. I don't necessarily believe that's true anymore. I think there's people who've got the scars that you need in this industry. It's a tough industry. It has a lot of disappointments. They've survived that. I think there's a much better cadre of talent now and executives in this country. So the next step is, right, how are we going to turn this story around and actually start not dwelling on our failures, which are no worse from a rate point of view than, say, they are in the States, but we don't have the same number of companies to fall back on. But we don't celebrate our success enough. We have had successes, and so it's been a gentle prod to the press that I've been asking about, can you celebrate success a little more? Because they certainly do in the US.
Isn't one of the issues that sometimes pointed out is that we've had our successes and they've all been bought? Mm-hmm. So what we're left with is a struggling, emerging biotechnology class, if I call it that, which, to be frank, are suffering because there isn't basically enough finance around to help them grow.
Yep. That's clearly, if you put on your nationalistic hat, you would love to see a major British biotech company of the likes of Genentech, the Amgens. I think the sad reality is actually you're not actually going to see those type of companies recreated probably now anywhere in the world because they're going to get taken out by big pharmas and other big biotechs now. So I think the days of actually dreaming of those things happening are gone. The reality is, I think, as long as we are creating value, and I would argue that, whilst we can dwell on the lack of a national major company, the reality is significant value has been created from some of our companies, and there obviously was some value that people wanted to purchase. And I think as long as we focus in on that aspect and building value in this country, we'll still get investor interest in this country. But we have to flip the story into a bit more of a success mode and look at it across the life sciences, which is why the trade associations in the sector are really starting to work much closer together.
So how would you measure your own success against, what parameter would you like to measure which would enable us to understand that actually biotech in Britain has moved forward?
Clearly, you can sort of put numbers of companies, obviously, and so on, amount of funds going into the industry. I would like to see the UK becoming a centre of interest for investors from around the globe, whether they're from North America or from Asia. I believe that actually the story is an incredible one for the UK. I think we need to be much more aggressive about how we sell it. I think we have every reason to get a lot of interest from investors from around the globe because we have depressed valuations, because we have equity gaps at the moment, and yet we still have this fantastic science base that hopefully now has been protected so it continue to produce the science. But let's have the world start coming here, because that will certainly turn around the city people.
But when you described your own experience in the United States, I mean, what's the missing piece besides the can-do attitude that Americans may appear to come across as? What's the key difference as you see it, and that ingredient that you would like to see come into the UK?
I guess it's certainly the thing you just said, that's there, the can-do attitude, and I guess the other word would be ambition.
So it's just that?
I actually I'm a pretty simple guy, and I look at things in a simple way, and I think we overcomplicate things sometimes. I see a lot of really, really good people in key positions in the UK at the moment. And yes, we are talking about trying to effect a culture shift here. I was asked by a publicly traded biotech CEO friend of mine from the States about 2 or 3 weeks ago over dinner, if you could do one thing in the UK, what would it be? And I said, change the culture. Right.
Because one thing that I observe when I go outside the UK is the number of UK executives running US biotech companies or Australian biotech companies or European biotech companies, as if one of the key exports for Britain are the executives themselves.
And I want to do something about that. I actually set up a network for expat executives in North America. Over the last 10 years, I've sort of kept the database and I've bequeathed it to BIA. It's about 1,000 strong, about 150 at CEO level. Our goal is that we're going to link these people back. Countries like India, New Zealand, China have done spectacular jobs reaching out to diaspora. We have more to gain than anyone. When you look at the quality of our executives abroad, our education system clearly produces not only great talent, it must produce entrepreneurs too. That gives the lie. Guys go abroad, they're in a different system, they succeed as entrepreneurs. So don't tell me the UK can't foster entrepreneurs. It's there, let's unlock it.
So let's go back to this. One of the favourite discussions always going on in Britain is about financing. And I suppose are we a victim of our own previous success in the sense that because Britain was one of the earlier entrants into biotechnology, there's a lot more tired venture capitalists in the UK, and that we really need some sort of fresh blood to come into the VC arena.
Yeah, and to be fair to the VCs, it's not just the VCs. I mean, it's the actual institutional investors as well. I mean, they've had some disappointments. I mean, we can't get around that, and we've got to find a way to turn the story around. And now, have there been successes? Yes. Probably not in the therapeutic area, which has had disappointments, but we have certainly had successes on the diagnostics and the device front and so on. And do I think it's ultimately we're going to have some successes in the therapeutic area? Absolutely. I mean, we have fantastic news today with Reneuron's stroke trial, first stem cell treatment to get into the clinic, being started in Glasgow. You know, there's a lot of good things happening at the moment. Perhaps we don't focus on it enough because it's not publicly traded companies, but there's actually a lot of very good things happening.
And the industry, as we've already noted, has changed. And in a sense, as you've already indicated, we're not going to see the same biotechnology companies appear as we did in the past. So where does that leave us? What type of biotechnology companies are we going to see? Are they always going to be now? I mean, it looks like the IPO market is probably gone forever, particularly for early stage companies. So you're going to have private companies with investors that are going to look for an exit, and that if you don't have an IPO exit to a public market, it's through acquisitions. So do we see a churn? In other words, we may have names of biotechnology companies, not just in the UK but around the world, coming through, maturing, and then being snapped up or disappearing.
I think for the time being, that's what's going to drive returns. It has to be that route until the public markets turn around. I mentioned earlier the work we're doing with the other trade associations. So particularly in the UK, we're working with the Device Association, which is the ABHI, the Diagnostics Association, BIVDA, and with the ABPI on the pharma side. We are working increasingly closer together. Now, there's two things driving that. That one is the work with the Office for Life Sciences, which has got created, is still continuing despite the change of government, which is a tremendous credit to the coalition that they've said that they're not going to get rid of it, which would be easy to do when you change governments, but they're keeping it. What it's done also, though, is it's actually forced the trade industries to actually look at each other and say, no, we've actually got a lot in common here. We need to work, and it's not just that, it's technology convergence that's going on. That's what you're alluding to there. You know, it's diagnostics driving stratified medicine, it's devices to deliver drugs and so on. So the market is going to drive all these sectors closer together. We just need to be at the vanguard of that and get people focused on, which was the reason for our R&D conference recently with the ABPI, get people focused on the tremendous value that is actually built in this country.
Let's just talk about culture. You've already talked. We've mentioned a few things around culture. One of the things that you observe in the US, for an example, I think, is a stronger sharing of information, stronger networks.
Sense of community.
And I sometimes feel whether Britain has that.
Doesn't. I'm trying to create it because I see it as hugely important. When a company joins the BIA, for instance, I don't want it to be just about what they're going to get out of the BIA. I think we've tended too long to actually think of it in those terms, and that's all well and good, and absolutely we must provide value for the money that comes in fees. But the reality is there's also got to be a good percentage, and I would put it as high as 30-40% of that fee has got to be with a view to investment. We need to invest in our community. The bigger the community we create, the more opportunity there is for people, the more fun we have. You know, perhaps fun sort of isn't used sometimes. It's perceived as a bit soft and too woolly for British sensibilities. But the reality is, why can't you have fun doing it? And I think creating that sense of community in the UK could go a long way, and I would hope that people can come along for that ride, because I think it's an exciting thing, and it's certainly something I picked up in the US.
Right. Now, the other thing, of course, the UK has, it's got at least 2 major pharmaceutical companies that are in the UK. How important is it for the pharmaceutical industry to get involved in this community?
Huge, and it's one of the drivers for the relationship we have with the ABPI, which is very close. It's one of the reasons we did the R&D conference 2 or 3 weeks ago, because we need each other. They have the deep pockets, they need our innovation. That's the way it's going at the moment. It's a strong position to be in, that we are in, to have 2 major pharmaceutical companies based here. But we need to make sure that the relationship just gets stronger and stronger and stronger because of that need for each other.
And you know, one observation that I have when I talk to people from the biotech community in the UK is one that's, you know, solace, maybe one way of describing it. And you know, is there, and it's genuine, it's not just somebody, it's something. Can we change that? Can that be turned around and move towards a more positive energy, which will then drive the industry further? And surely that's something that an organisation like yours should be doing.
Absolutely, and that's what I want to do. I'm looking for a few good people, I will say men and women, to come along for that ride. I know, having spent 10 months in the job now, I know there's a lot of good people in the UK with great talent who share the same passion I do for what the UK should become. Our job is to mobilise those people, sustain each other when we're getting the negative ninnies, as I call them, you know, attacking us. Because I don't care what anyone says, that's the future I want. I want that positive future. I don't want the negative. It doesn't work.
No.
Positive works.
Yeah, self-defeating. So let's look at the industry going forward.
Yes.
Over the next 3 to 4 years, maybe 5 years, is going to be critically important for the industry generally right across the world. So what do you see when you look into your crystal ball?
For the UK.
For the UK, for the biotechnology industry in the UK, what sort of shift are we going to see? Because we need shifting.
Yep. I would hope much greater global engagement. I would hope that not only are companies really understanding the need to get on planes and go and see clients, go and see partners and be aggressive about it, but that we are sufficiently attractive. And let's not forget, London is the asset. London's the most visited city in the world, not just by tourists, but by corporates. That's why we're exploring with the ABPI and others the notion, could we co-locate? One of the things, the vision is that we can create a hub, create a centre that's a place not only for the industry to meet across the UK in London, but it's also a destination for corporates and investors coming in from overseas who all come through London. Let's give them a place to come where they can be either meet or be signposted to the best the UK's got to.
So you have a bio cluster, basically, literally in one building.
Make the UK a super cluster. We keep comparing ourselves to the US. It's a mistake. It's too big. But if we think of ourselves as a super cluster, so as a region for life sciences, then you look at that asset base I mentioned earlier on with the universities, and you say, right, what's our competition now? It's not the US, it's Boston, San Francisco, San Diego, Singapore. I'd put us against any one of those when it comes to sheer science base. We're behind in terms of the numbers of companies and so on, but we've got some incredible assets to build, so I don't see any reason why we have to play second fiddle to anyone.
Nigel, thank you very much indeed for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure.